basically, because we didn't have time to do this in advance, I'm just going to check in. Okay, I'm just going to call your name and ask you to respond so I know that everything's working. Chris Menard.
Here.
Peter Beardmore.
Here.
Dave Passios.
Here.
Jay Simeone.
Here.
Evan Waters.
Here.
And Heather will not be with us tonight.
She said she is coming. She's coming from Green Communities over shortly.
That was the other Heather. The Heather Soroka is.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
okay.
I do that every time we meet.
I understand. Yeah, no, I know that her, she had planned on coming on, and I assumed that everything was going to be, because there was such a packed agenda over there. So with that being said, and it being after 7 o'clock, I'm going to call the meeting to order, and I'm going to basically just start with the remote meeting script. And this is just basically in accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law. Please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access Channel. And this meeting of the Finance Committee is being conducted remotely. The town of Lunenburg, in response to COVID-19, is currently following the guidance from the Lunenburg Board of Health, Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and the CDC regarding the virus and steps communities can take to prevent the spread. Basically, at this point, I just wanted to make sure that people understand that if we do take any votes during this meeting, they will be taken by roll call. We will allow for public comment at the beginning and the end of the meeting. If you do want to make a public comment and you can't attend the meeting, but would like to, you can send an email to tburchfield@lunenburgonline.com, and we'll check that before we end the meeting, just to make sure that we get any comments that might be out there. Okay, well, I hear dings, but I don't see anybody in a waiting room, so. Somehow I lost the agenda already. It's really sad that I can lose the agenda so soon. I had all this time to, I was sitting here staring at it. I think I'd have it memorized. Actually, Chris, if you're going to be ready at some point, since we're going to be starting with some of your stuff, I'm going to be turning over the screen to you at some point. Then I guess basically we'll start with the only announcement is that we did receive an email from Elaine Peterson about the town report, and all of the departments typically put in a report. Ours is typically the write-up from the town meeting warrant, so from last year. So I think we're all set with that, unless anybody had anything special they wanted to contribute to the town report. Is there any public comment from anybody on the committee? Is there any public comment from anybody in the public? Okay, no hands. The first discussion we were going to have was the matrix that we have been discussing in terms of decision-making around making a recommendation for actually, do you already have the ability to share your screen?
Yeah, last time we.
Did I have to give it to you, or did you just have it?
Looks as if like we've got it.
I think you just have it.
Yeah.
Okay. basically, I'm just going to ask Chris if you'll go through it, and if anybody has any questions or comments as we go, feel free to pipe in.
All right, yeah, so we've talked about this a little bit over a few meetings, in general on any capital project, but more specifically on some of the large ticket items. I had a meeting with Terry over the break, to kind of review this and get some thoughts on this, but the idea being for, a large project like a building, there's obviously a lot of financial impacts and second order impacts and that sort of thing. So, I think our role in that is to make sure that we've thoroughly reviewed it, asked all the questions, and to some extent through that process documented some of the decisions, and make this available to the community so that hopefully it helps them to make their decisions coming into town meeting, and the discussion itself could be quicker. What I have on the screen here is something that I stole from the Northborough budget process. So for every capital project, they give a one pager, and the idea being up in the right hand corner, there's a picture of it. Like some of us still don't maybe know what a trackless is, although I think it's something that removes snow from sidewalks. So you'd have a picture of it. Sometimes there's pictures that are in the presentations that we get at the various meetings. Kind of a quick, few sentences on the description and the justification for the need, what department this would serve, kind of maybe a quick couple sentences on financial impact and source of revenue. And then I kind of like this, what they did is they had the source of funds. So perhaps, some of it is out of operating revenues or borrowing, or some kind of enterprise fund that, either wholly funds a project or funds aspects of a project, and how is it, the recommended financing over the years. So to me, on any of the capital planning projects, a one-page summary is, something that is used, in business. We use these kind of things all the time, and, it was something that another town did. And I almost remember that we did these many years ago, but perhaps I'm just losing my mind. So summary, but something as big as a building, multi-million-dollar, multi-year, multiple department kind of thing. I think we got to go and ask a little bit deeper questions as a board, and then hopefully have answers ready for the meeting. So here's some of the high-level questions that we might be able to ask. Can we afford this? How does it impact our financial levy limits and credit ratings? Does this project meet the needs of the town now and in the future? In the case of this specific building, it's both for community and boards and commissions, town, school. There's some dedicated space and then some multi-use space. So are we thinking 25 years into the future, or whatever the useful life of this building is? Things like, what are the financial impacts on the taxpayer? Are there changes to the operational costs or even the operational model that would be used to fund this? Will we see, where this building has a lot of school uses, will the schools be funding the operational costs of it, or does it come out of the town side of the budget? Are there additional operational costs on this, or reductions? Those kind of things. For a building, is it expandable, modular? What kind of criteria might, quality attributes might you put towards a project like this that are important for us to decision? The obvious questions will be, how does this, fit into the larger building footprint? The town hall, the Ritter building, the schools, et cetera. Just give that big picture view of how that all. Will it vacate any buildings? Will any become vacant because of this? Is it equal access, et cetera? What additional sources of funding might be available? I know there was For example, a bond bill for kitchens, a community kitchen, could we apply that into this? Is there other kind of grant funding or, existing grant funding or that could be applied to it? And then the rest of the project was just the PowerPoint here was just going through each one of those. What are some of the applicable policies that are in play and how do we do against it? The debt policy, capital planning policy, tax levy policies, regulations, et cetera. I mentioned the space, so is this building going to be bursting at the seams on day one? Kind of feel that some of our projects have done that, or do we really have a plan and have we dedicated enough growth into this building so that 5, 10, 25 years from now, we're not saying, gosh, we should have made every department, 5, 10% built bigger so that we could have fit that extra person that, could be required over time. Somehow also, is it going to be that on, day one you open, you can fit everyone in there, but by day, year 10, all the conference rooms are now taken up by personnel and, the gymnasium has been repurposed. So all the community aspects that were promised as part of this have kind of gone by the wayside. So I'd like to kind of see some, something related to that especially because of the purpose of this building. Multi-use space. So, down here, I was just looking at, we have a lot of boards and commissions that hopefully will all come to this, one town hall. You hear about Town Hall A, Town Hall B, Town Hall C. So this is kind of consolidating it. You just look at the frequency of meetings on a monthly cadence of all these boards and commissions. The conference room 1 through 4 are probably going to be used pretty heavily on a Monday through Thursday kind of tempo. So probably not available to communities, but maybe they have them on access on the weekends. And then you look at the community organizations, some that have come forward and expressed needs, but others that, for whatever reason haven't come forward, like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, school boards, athletic organizations. I remember when I was on the Little League board, we had to meet in a private business because it was just too hard to find space. I think groups will come once they have learned that there's good space that's available. Let's see. Oop.
So, Chris, can I just interject here? I think that all of this is like important stuff to kind of have on our checklist of questions to ask or discuss or things to ensure that are part of the presentation and discussion that come from the redesign committee.
Yep.
But I'm curious as to is that how you're coming at this? Is that this essentially becomes a checklist, or is there something else beyond that? Is there a formula that you're looking for to come up with where ultimately it drives a recommend, don't recommend decision? Yeah,
so I don't know if it's a hard recommendation. I would say like if this on day one is everything is full, and we see in the 5-year projection that every board, because of the growing size, is going to be at 120% of total, then yeah, I think we've kind of, we've got a problem. Now, I think that the design committee has started to look at that, and I think there's probably a lot of information that we can grab from the team that's pulled that together, because I've kind of seen similar things throughout the presentations. I did send this package also off to Greg Roy. He's going to kind of take a look at it. And these don't have to be the exact way we do it. It was just to spur discussion on, I think that these are the kinds of things that this group should be kind of independently looking at, as a legislative body, and, the financial view of the things that, that perhaps the day-to-day of that commission has just needs an independent, view of.
Yeah, I think for a first look at this, I mean, my take on it is this is the type of information it would be good for the, for me to have. Now, what's going to weigh in terms of how I would weigh a recommendation is going to be if I don't even have this information to consider, that's gonna leave me not wanting to make a recommendation at all. But I think that basically having an answer and then maybe sitting with this for a while the Passios reuse committee is putting all of their information together, I think it's helpful for them to also have a sense of what kind of information are we going to be looking for when they are ready to come to the finance committee for a recommendation. And I think this is, I think it organizes the information pretty well for me. Getting yes, no, getting, or, projections over time, or, now that we've spent a lot of time having people work remotely, is there going to be more remote working? Is there going to be less remote working? Like all of those types of things.
Yeah, I think that the reason for the question is that I think from a checklist perspective, from a list of information that we would want to discuss or would want to have somebody's take on, I think that this is good. But I'm a little bit concerned of making perfect the enemy of good enough here, right? Like we're in a position right now, like when you talk about meeting space, where we're already like way behind the 8 ball. This will advance the ball maybe halfway across the table, but it might not, sink it in the corner pocket. So I'm a little bit concerned that we're setting ourselves up here for saying, well, it's not going to be good enough. And I think ultimately this is going to come down to, okay, all of us individually, as individuals, are going to have to make an assessment in terms of what the town's needs are and how we think that this particular plan makes progress to addressing those needs. But I'm not sure in the next few months, the finance committee will be at a position where we can say, okay, here are the measurements we're going to use to figure that out. I don't think that we have the time or capacity to do that.
Yeah, I don't know that at the end of this, we've used the term rubric, and maybe that implies more than what we were really looking for. But I don't think at the end of this we say this gets a 76, out of 100.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really the intent. But
okay,
there may be some real deal breakers, in this, if at least from our perspectives, that would say, this is a real problem.
mm-hmm.
Maybe there's not, but. And then, and that's towards the recommendation. And then, just as, presenting to the public, who may not be watching every meeting of ours or every, meeting of TC Passio's committee, it just, kind of summarizes things so that they have the ability to go into the meeting with more information. So.
Yeah, and I will say that basically it seems to, certainly the types of information that's requested here is going to be the type, when you're sitting at town meeting and somebody says, well, did you look at this? Then, basically it's easy enough to say that, did we miss anything in terms of considering a recommendation? Because that's going to be what our job is going to be as a committee. And I don't even know. I mean, Dave, they're not looking for any kind of, we're not looking to do a recommendation at this year's town meeting, are we?
Most definitely.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So basically what will happen will be if we haven't looked at all of this and we're not able to say that we've considered all of this, then, and if there's a way to show what it was that we looked at, I think people will feel more confident in the recommendation. So.
Right. I do want to add that there's the use and design kind of stuff, which I think, that we do need to clearly have a checklist of things to discuss and talk about. And I don't know that there's a rubric, but there's clearly a checklist and a discussion that ought to follow. In terms of the cost, to my Dave, are we nearing a cost where we actually have a dollar value on this?
I think we're going to see some numbers in February because we plan to start outreach by early March.
Yeah, Mickey's hands are moving here for a Maytown meeting. So
yeah, oh yeah, definitely.
And for that matter, a debt exclusion on the ballot. So one of the things that I had started work on and it got kind of lost with John leaving and personal issues that I had in the fall. But we started working on a debt analysis.
Mm-hmm.
The town manager, as everyone knows, will be presenting a 5-year forecast at our next meeting. Some of the preliminary work that I had done was taking a couple of big blocks around costs, just using, wild ass guesses on my part in terms of what costs would be. Against the spreadsheet that she and the finance director had put together a year ago for last year's 5-year forecast. That'll be updated next week, and I'm envisioning that we'll be able to take whatever this cost is, or a wild ass guess around this cost, as well as then the other big debt exclusion that I think we can all project for the next decade, which is Turkey Hill, and start to look at how those might look from a impact on taxpayers and debt service relative to total budget and how that fits in with fiscal policies.
Right, and I think that's, and I think that's
we
one of
have
the.
that from the town manager and the finance director.
Yep.
We'll be able to look at that over the course of the next few weeks and say, okay, these two projects in particular, here's how it might look. And start to throw that against the spreadsheet that they share with us from the 5-year forecast.
Yep. Chris, you want to continue then?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Derailed
So, the other one that's obviously going to come up, whether people want it or not, is what's the impact on the other buildings? So, Brooks House, it doesn't seem like the facilities director, moves out of that. Maybe they do. There's a positive impact maybe on the library where more community room availability has been made. Sorry, I missed the first two. Town Hall, Ritter Building, are they, vacated? What's the ramifications on that? DPW building, one that always has come up is the Parks Commission does not like to meet there. So this gives more opportunity to meet again in the common location. Schools, you mentioned Turkey Hill. One of the comments that was made last night at the TC Passios meeting was that when they perceived of this project, they kind of thought, well, maybe we can just knock down the northern part, the northern wing there. But it turns out it's kind of needed, and a lot of the uses for schools. And if there is back a couple charts where 5 years, 10 years from now, we do see that the administrative functions would start to outgrow the west wing, I think they're calling it. Perhaps we got to budget more into Turkey Hill to account for extended day and some of those programs that are, so that could be part of this kind of impact analysis, is kind of showing some level of the big picture of buildings and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Operational costs, just something I don't know if it can be quantitative, but at least qualitatively assessed as to, what the impacts of these are. Who picks it up? Is it in the school budget or the town side of the budget, et cetera? What are the replace costs and when? We got a lot of systems that are in there. Some might not be updated, some may be updated. When, what is the life expectancy on some of these things? What might not be included initially was another thought that I didn't get into this, but it came up last night. Like perhaps the kitchen isn't isn't done in the initial build, but, 5 years from now, we put in, the kitchen that, or the bond picks up the kitchen, that bond bill. So a couple of those decisions, but I would like that fairly well documented and succinctly so that, everyone goes in, eyes wide open on any, scope creep in the future. And then, bond rating analyses, debt and levy, tax levy analysis, like you mentioned, and then, what are all the various funding sources? So those are just some of the ideas that I had come up with, and then Terry and I kind of collaborated on, and certainly if there's other items that people would be looking for, I'd be open for that. I think some of this would come, like I said, from the TC Passios Building Design Committee, and I think other would come from, excuse me, from town manager and her department staffs. So, and I don't think anything here is crazy, that it's out of the realm of being possible to populate, and maybe everything was intended to be done anyways, but these would be some of the things I'd be looking to have on the table.
Yeah, I think, I'm particularly interested in anything related to operating costs, because in past projects that we've gotten into as a town, I particularly recall the library, where that came up during the discussion of whether to build, and there was a lot of consternation following the building of the library, just in terms of the impact on the DPW for things like snow removal and sidewalk care and that sort of thing. So I think that those are things that, any department that is involved in maintenance ought to be signed up in advance and on board and well aware of what obligations they're taking on. So that's an area, as well as, what are the carrying costs of the buildings that we're vacating, and are we going to do the Vertex projects that have been outlined already in the buildings that we're vacating, and are we committed to that from a capital perspective?
Yep.
Any other questions or comments on this? Anything you want to see? Anything you don't want to see as we move forward? Evan, aren't you glad you joined the committee?
I am, actually.
By the way, I neglected to, I wanted to welcome Evan. I wasn't at the last meeting, and I know it was your first meeting, and welcome aboard. It's a pleasure to have you here. Looking forward to
Thanks
working.
very much. I'm happy to be here.
Good.
And I guess even a question to Heather Lemieux is anything in here too difficult to obtain in the timeline, or unreasonable ask from an analysis standpoint?
It's the time that takes to gather the information, I guess. And so I have to review it more. I only saw that first slide initially. So everything that you went over tonight is new to me.
Okay.
And I think basically, just this is going to be the type of information that people at town meeting are going to be looking for to make a yay or nay vote. So I think being able to gather it so that it's available, I think will be helpful. And frankly, again, like I would feel, I want to say, what was it, 2 or 3 years ago, I remember somebody asking the finance committee if the renovating the Passios for this purpose was going to affect taxpayers. And I'm thinking at that point, there hasn't even been a decision to move forward yet. So yes, there will be an effect when it happens, but I just remember people were kind of upset that we didn't already have the numbers down, and that was way early in the process.
Yeah.
So I think this will make people feel a lot more confident about any decision that they're going to be making, and the fact that everything, has been at least considered, so.
One area of concern that I have is that, is there adequate time to do what needs to be done to adequately inform the vote, to adequately hear from and discuss with the consultants, architects, the building design committee, and make a recommendation prior to town meeting. Town meeting is, I believe, May 1st is when it's scheduled. So, we are 3.5 months away, which is not a lot of time, when we also have to do the budget. So I'm just throwing that out there that we should be thinking about the calendar right now, because we're gonna need the time.
Is it at this town meeting that there will be an up or down vote on proceeding with the actual renovations? Or is this going to be another phase to pay for something else? Is this basically an up or down on the Passios is going to be turned into town offices and we're going to be going into borrowing and stuff this spring?
If I could give you the initial answer and then have Heather correct me on anything I get wrong. From my perspective, there will be a proposal brought to town meeting on May 1st with the dollar amounts attached to it and what exactly is planned to be done. And that will be a proposal that town meeting will either approve or disapprove of. What happens if it's approved, obviously, the process moves forward. If it's not approved, I think I got to drop that one to Heather. My guess is that we go back to the drawing board and come up with a new proposal, but I'm not sure that's correct.
Yeah, I think what Dave said, I would agree with. I mean, the cost estimation is going to play a huge role in how this whole timeline proceeds. So if it's a project that can be within our operating budget and not be a debt exclusion, that will obviously have an impact on timeline.
Yep.
And town meeting votes, because a fall town meeting vote requires a higher majority than a 2/3 majority for a vote than a annual town meeting. And but I think part of the design process with the architect is try to whittle that cost estimate down to a palpable number that the committee thinks can go forth to town meeting.
Right, that makes sense. And basically, yeah, if there's no debt exclusion, then we don't have to have a town meeting and then an election. So.
So are we seriously considering doing something that would be run off the town budget and not a debt exclusion for this project?
They haven't given us any indication of the cost estimate, so I can't really answer that.
Okay. Well, I mean, so in my mind, this is the first time I've actually considered that this might not be a debt exclusion. In my mind, this has been a debt exclusion all along, but the yes/no decision is effectively the debt exclusion decision. It's not the executive decision to move forward with the plan. You know what I mean? Like you've got the financing of this thing is the big decision, and a debt exclusion. And I'm assuming this is going to be a fairly sizable dollar amount. This needs to be voted on at town meeting and properly put together. And then it also needs to be on the ballot 2 weeks later. So, there's a lot to do here between now and in May, if this is in fact going to be a debt exclusion. If it's not going to be a debt exclusion, if it's going to be something else, then we need to be thinking about what the effects are on the budget for the budget that we're about to start working on, which is going to be, if it's a substantial amount of money that is not debt exclusion, if it's regular borrowing or whatever, then that's a whole other can of worms that we need to consider.
Right, and that's why the debt analysis part is so important, because basically, where we are in all of our percentages as we set them according to policy. So it'll be interesting to see when the numbers come out.
But to be clear, I don't believe the policy differentiates between regular borrowing and excluded debt.
It does.
It does? Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And what is that differentiation?
Well, basically and I'm not sure what the exact percentage is now, but the debt can't exceed a certain percentage of the town expenditures. And so we were looking to expand the space between the, and I'm not even sure where we are in terms of how close we are, but when we first started it, we were looking at the debt as a percentage of the budget not exceeding, and I think for the ombudsman's budget, I think that was not to exceed 10%, 11%.
It's 4% for net regular debt compared
Okay.
to it's 11% of excludable debt
Okay,
compared to levy, and the aggregate of the two can be no more than 14%.
okay,
So
Okay.
fiscal 21, we're at 1.56% of 4%.
mhm,
Net regular debt, 9.87% of the 11% for excludable debt, and 11.27 for 14% compared to the 14%.
And again, back to the presentation, that would be one thing I'd like to have, laid out in that, policies slide, lay out all the applicable policies that we need to.
Yeah, because
to have in front of us.
I suspect that, this is something that we may need to look at in terms of policy for this project in and of itself, given those numbers, let alone considering the longer term ramifications when you consider Turkey Hill.
right, and again, it's also, it's hard at this point to anticipate without knowing what the outside
We need the number.
is.
We need
Yeah.
the number. Yeah.
Yeah, without a number, it's.
And that's really been the problem, right? I mean, I started with, Dave Passio's made up number last year of 10 to 14 million dollars, right? And I think I got that right, Dave. But we should.
I think it was wider than that, 7 to
Okay.
14, I believe.
Okay. so I feel like we should be at a point where we're at least narrowing that a little bit,
Yeah, I'm sure they are, so.
And the architects are being very cautious not to bring any numbers out until they've really vetted all of the issues. In my committee report later, I'll mention a few things that needed to get sorted out, and we did do that last night.
Okay. Good.
Okay. All right, then if there's no other suggestions for things to throw into there, I think, and then certainly, yeah, Heather would probably really enjoy some time to, spending with it. But I also think that it's going to be information that we're going to be also looking for the Passios committee to have some answers to help us fill in some of those blanks. Then we can move on to one of the other things that we talked about while we were talking about that was, and I don't know if you want to bring that up too, Chris, is the revolving accounts or the special revenue funds. One of the things that we also talked about as we were talking about this was just trying to get a little bit more transparency and understanding around the information that Karen had shared with us around the revolving and special revenue funds. And I think what Chris had pulled up was, and hopefully Karen was able to find it. We weren't looking for any information tonight as much as we were trying to figure out if there was a way to present that information in terms of the sheet that the state put out. Do you have that, Chris? You had it in the OneDrive, in the
Can I just say something? The sheet that you're referring to, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's a Department of Revenue chart that shows the different funds that are allowed under the different statutes.
Yep.
One of the things that I can say is Heather, when she requested her FY22 budget proposals from the departments, one of the things that she asked for, one of the spreadsheets that she asked that departments fill out is alternative funding sources that they have. So
Sweet.
I think that's something that she will see as departments submit their budgets, if they have any grant funding available for specific purposes, or if they have the use of revolving funds. But I think you would find that there's not very many departments, at least on the town side, that have those kind of funds that can offset their operating costs. And that's not to say that they don't receive grant funds where they would be able to make particular purchases or be able to run some programs, in particular the police, like if they get a speed enforcement grant or they get a grant to purchase bulletproof vests or something like that. But
Oh, come on. I saw 10 cents in there for something.
I know there's some that have been sitting around for quite a while that should just be closed out to the general fund. But I guess what I'm saying is for regular operating purposes, I don't think there would be a lot of special revenue fund use that would be available to departments to offset their normal operating. Most
Yeah.
of the things that they have are for particular purposes.
Right, right. And I think that's fine. And I think basically it's just being able to present that information. Yeah, that's not the chart that I wanted.
Yeah, well, I know I was kind of prepared for what I was going to ask, but
Oh, okay, then that's fine. I'll let you prepare for what you were going to ask, but, and I'll turn it over to you, Chris, at this point.
Could I just make a comment before we?
Sure.
So when I think about revolving funds and off budget funds, when I recall the presentations that came last year from the department heads, I think that each department head, to some degree, or most department heads, would refer to revolving accounts that they relied upon. The library comes immediately to mind, where it was part of that presentation, and there's friends money, and there's revolving accounts from, fees and fines and those kinds of things and whatnot. And that was part of the budget. And I felt confident that the department head was signing up for spending that money in accordance with their budget proposal relative to everything else that they were talking about. And I was fine with that. I think that me personally, the one that I found troubling over the course of this past year was Chapter 90. And specifically because those funds were used for something that was way outside of what we had seen during the budget presentations in the previous year. And so, if that's something that we could resolve, or any other, large source of funds my question is how do we know that if it sits outside of the omnibus budget, that the funds are going to be spent the way that we're hearing they're going to be spent during the budget presentation?
Well, I'm not sure. Okay, so that's probably a different question than what we were going at with this, although.
well, somewhat related, I guess. Like, to me, I saw this list of funds, and there's a lot of them, and like you said, some are like 11 cents. So who cares, right? But from my perspective, it would be nice if there was kind of a description of what it's used for, a description of how we get money into the fund, or how we got money into the fund, and that sort of thing. So in who controls it, like which department controls it. So for example, there's several parks funds here, and I know that there's an effort going on ultimately to perhaps revitalize Marshall Park. it would be good if there's funds in here that would be eligible for monies that we could start to put that into the plan. If there was, additional sources of revenue to get some projects started there. So I think it gets to a bigger level of understanding of the entire financial picture versus just, reviewing the budget. So it seems to me that, anytime you establish an account, it would seem general accounting principles, it was what we do in the private sector. You have a description of what that account is and where the money goes to or from. It's not just, and maybe that exists somewhere, and that would be great. And if it could just be augmented into this for our understanding, I'd appreciate that. I think other, boards and commissions might also appreciate if they have monies that they may know about or not. So that was my thought on it.
Right, and I think even with one of the things that came up with the Chapter 90 money, and maybe this is a way to get at it too, was that the chart that we had been looking at from the state had also descriptors of what it could be used for, so that basically there's no question about. So that's great to know that Chapter 90 funds could be used for equipment necessary to maintain the roads, and that it's not just for pavement or whatever. And that's true of most of the funds that are there. And I think that's what, when I was thinking in terms of presenting the funds, it would be not just what the fund is, but what the purpose of the fund is. And, so when we have the revolving fund for, there's one in there for the ambulances, right? There's a lot of different revolving funds, but just basically making sure that people understand what the fund is and what it's for. And
I think that there's, in addition to those columns that Chris had on that spreadsheet, there's what department controls it, what's it going to be used for in the coming year as part of a budget review, and if that changes, who has the authority to change it and why, right? And what is the criteria?
yeah, where's the DLS form? Because basically in terms of the presentation of it, it was mostly just whether or not funding can be used for salaries or things like that. Is it?
Yeah, so then maybe that's another column too, is what is it for?
Well, no.
Right.
That's why I wanted to, the one that I was looking at was the DLS one that you have in the municipal, the MMA folder, Chris?
Yep, I'm pulling it up now.
Yeah, that's what, like basically for me, it was much more information based and just really having an understanding about, what funds are available under what, so, and these don't necessarily, this may be more information than we need, but this is the type of information that what department does it fall under, what, things like that. And I don't need an answer tonight. I don't want to scare anybody.
Well, you're scaring me already, but. No.
Well, I've been working on it for 9 years now, Karen.
I'm just kidding, but like if on the chart that you're looking at right now, if you look at the top one that's on the sheet that you're on, no, go back.
Oh, sorry.
You were not the top of this page, the 4453 E&a-half accounts.
Yep.
Those are the accounts that we vote every year, and
Yep.
they are voted into our bylaw. And so every year we vote the spending authorization, and when the funds were originally established, all of that information was there.
Right.
So I understand exactly what you're looking for. I don't know how easy it would be to just put something together like that for you. I could certainly go through the list and tell you whether it's a grant or a revolving fund or whatever the case may be, and I could let you know what department it's under and that sort of thing. But I certainly go into specifics like this, but it might take me a while to get there.
Yeah, my opinion, I don't think we need it, today or in the next few months leading into this season that we're in, but certainly I think it's a project worth undertaking for, better understanding of our total financial picture.
Like what I said, we'll see some of what you're looking for in the budget process, because as I said, Heather did ask for that information from departments for alternative funding sources that they have for, different things that they will purchase during the fiscal year. So hopefully that information will be provided to the budget.
Oh, yeah, no, and it's actually, it's also, to me, it's all helpful to see and to like having it in the one place was interesting, because what I'm used to, yes, the library would come in and say, this is what our budget is. And then they would talk about some of the sources of revenue, but not necessarily all of them. And I don't know how many years it took me to understand how much of their budget was actually, through revolving funds or through gift funds or through other avenues. And so I just find it helpful from an information perspective. And I basically, I'm mostly just going back to when Michelle Walton, this was one of the things I think that she was trying to get at, was understand. It just helps to understand what it is that we're looking at, and again, what the points of decision are, so that and people understanding what the revolving funds are for, or what a grant fund can be used for, and why we still have 10 cents sitting in a thing, because we couldn't spend it outside of, it couldn't be used for something outside of what the fund was created for. So it's got to go through a process of being written back to general fund. But anyway, so
Now, the other thing is like when Karen wins that Mega Millions tonight and, retires next week, there is that continuity towards, archiving the information that's, she intimately may know, but not everyone knows. So I think there's obviously that benefit to it as well.
The
Oh, yeah,
Mega
most of
Millions
this is in
tomorrow,
Karen's
so we've got a whole day from Karen tomorrow. We're gonna get all that information.
yeah, she'll be home.
But I'm sure she'll donate the money for the TC Passios renovation.
If she wins the Mega Millions, I doubt it. I think she's going to get a nice home on the Cape.
Go further away than that.
Smart.
Only if you can get out of state. We got to wait for COVID to get over.
I know.
Um,
Obviously, that's something that we work on for you, so that you have a good grip on what those alternative funding sources are.
yeah, no, that'd be great, because like basically, I mean, the committee turns over too, and like every time somebody with all of this memory goes away, then you go through another 5 years of where did that come from? So, all right, town manager, finance director reports. Heather's muted.
I said, Karen, you want to go first?
I did a lot of talking just now. It's your turn.
I'm trying to think what updates we have since last time. When was last time we met?
December 10th? No.
Later.
Yeah, it was December 10th.
Okay.
We had Christmas. We had New Year's.
A couple pieces of good news are, and I think we had this news at that time, that our health renewal rates for our active employees are going to be 3%. We'll know more after the MMA. That's when they release their rate ranges. So we'll have a good idea, and our loss claims are good. So meaning we have not a lot of loss claims. So that's positive news for the budget. We did, Karen provided me, she received a copy of our Worcester County Regional Assessment, and that did not increase as substantially as it normally does. So that was another piece of good news. So I think that was around what, 2%, Karen, increase?
Yeah, it was 2%, 1.92.
So another piece of good news. We received confirmation from Representative Sina that 25,000 made it into as an earmark for the primary school fire alarm system, but that's a fraction of the total cost of that project. So that's what they could get in. They didn't, before we went into that, they said, given the year, it's unlikely that we'd get any earmarks, but that's something they were able to get in. We're meeting with our legislators on Tuesday night at the select board's meeting. Just more of an introductory meeting. We have two brand new, Representative Krishmarik and Senator Cronin. And I've already had a meeting, Zoom one-on-one meeting with them. So they're queued in on all our bond bills that we have out there and any help that they can give. So they have all that information as far as the chapter of those acts, the dates, and the projects associated with them. And the last budget priorities list that we had provided in the fall for the fiscal 21 budget, they also have that. So until that's updated again, they have the most current information.
Heather, you had sent an email also that the CARES Act got
Yes.
pushed. Does that mean we can incur additional charges? And has the limit gone up too? Can you talk a little bit about that?
No, so the total eligible amount maintains that original amount that they provided each of the communities. So we can spend down that amount. So we submit, Karen has been doing which is a lot of work. So thank you, Karen, for submitting for reimbursement. The FEMA money that's still ongoing as well to submit for reimbursement. So we have now until December 31st of 2021 to fully spend those funds. So that was good news, which obviously we didn't know, up until the last minute that the federal government made that decision. So I was very happy to hear that.
Approximately how much money is left in that?
I believe, Karen, is it between 500,000 and 600,000? Lost her.
No, I think you're right, Heather.
That's good.
Yes.
We have to-
No. It can only be used for unbudgeted expenses, though. But
Did anything?
we can anything we anticipate COVID related, the beginning of next fiscal year, we can use those funds. So we won't budget those items.
Peter? Do you have questions?
Yeah, I got several questions. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? I've been having microphone issues. Yeah, okay.
Yep, you're good.
So just a couple of thoughts in terms of the upcoming budget. I read in the Sentinel today that the town of Methuen did something I thought was pretty great, which is they are refunding the licensing fees for bars and restaurants for the current fiscal year, which I think, given the extraordinary stress that particular sector has been under for the last almost a year and will likely remain under for the next 6 months at least. Perhaps if there's a few dollars to spare this year, that potentially we can look as a town at doing whatever we can to relieve highly stressed sectors of business within our town. So that's just a suggestion and a thought that maybe we could look at. And you all know I'm for spending the money that we have and for levying to the limit and those kinds of things. But I think in particular this year, the bars and restaurants in Lunenburg are under extraordinary stress, and whatever we can do to help them out, we ought to be thinking about. I mentioned some concerns that I had earlier about the budget timeline with respect to the TC Passios building project. The school committee, the superintendent published on the school department's website a calendar for their budget plan for this year. And in my very high level comparison in terms of what you had laid out, Heather, for the budget calendar, I'm concerned that once again we're running into a calendar problem where we will be asked to recommend a budget that does not include a school department budget that has been endorsed by the school committee. So I don't know that to be for sure, but it's an area of concern, and I'm wondering if you could potentially have that conversation, if you haven't already, with the superintendent, figure that out and properly set expectations for us in terms of what's feasible there. And then lastly, I noted at the selectmen's meeting on Tuesday that you reported that the fuel tank project at the DPW is nearing completion, and that there is approximately $80,000 of unspent capital on that project. I recall that we had directed a certain dollar value that was the estimate for that project to the project. Then there was some earmark money that came in addition to that. And I'd be curious, because I just honestly don't recall all the facts and figures, but I'm curious as we wrap up that project, if perhaps at a future meeting you could report back kind of, here was what was intended, here's what's happened, here's where the state money came in, and here's what's left over, just for continuity purposes.
You mean just kind of a breakdown?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so the 80,000. So we spent down the earmark first, and leaving whatever remaining funds for the capital articles. There were two to reappropriate at a future meeting when that balance was known. So right now, given the information that we have, barring no further change orders or anything, there is about $80,000 remaining. And so that would, I believe, and I can give this at another meeting, but I'm going off memory. So I think there was a total amount available of $495 for the project. So that would include all the engineering and permitting needed and the construction costs.
Okay.
Heather, that 495 includes the state money, right? The
Yes.
earmark, yes.
Mhm.
And do you recall what we originally appropriated for that and what the earmark was?
The earmark was 165, and the first capital article I think was 110, and the second capital article was 220.
Okay. So suffice to say, it cost more than what we had originally planned, but the 165 got us over the hump.
Yes, and part of that we ran into with the permitting piece of it. So there was
Evan,
delays and increased needs for further design work.
Fair enough. Thank you.
You're welcome.
go ahead, Evan.
Thank you. Peter, just kind of going off of what you had said with the helping out the bars and restaurants, wouldn't that technically then fall under the CARES Act money? Couldn't that be then used for that, since you can't budget that money? You were just Yes.
I don't think that we can allocate CARES Act money to private establishment, but we can refund or waive licensing fees.
Yeah, because basically the budget took into account those fees, so it wasn't an unbudgeted, it wasn't an unbudgeted item, so it wouldn't qualify anyway, but yeah, it would basically be if the town wanted to do that. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, just a question on the Flat Hill, the bridge, the culvert. Is that, we're actively moving forward on repairing that, right? And how are you funding that?
So the previous town meeting last June voted for the appropriation for the design work.
Okay,
And so we have to go for a full design through Mass DOT standards. So you have to submit at different phases till it reaches 100% design phase that's approved by Mass DOT. And then it can go out to bid. But we are working with our designer, trying to fast track that. So they'd be ready in the spring to put it out to bid and hope potentially, be ready for a July 1, around that summertime start. We're also they're going to be putting together a small bridge program application for funding because it would be Mass DOT thinks it is a good project. It's very, it meets all the requirements, and plus given the critical nature of it, even though that funding hasn't been announced yet. So, but they recommended that we proceed with putting an application together. So when it is announced, we can just submit it and hopefully be eligible for funding. But that is one of the capital planning projects for the construction costs.
so you don't perceive any gaps in funding resources towards, the expedited repair of that issue?
We wouldn't be able to start the construction until we had the funding in place because it's close, it's 400 and I think 30,000 was the construction costs. So unless we received notification about the small bridge program grant, we wouldn't be able to do anything until we had an appropriation in hand.
So this is going to look a lot like the fuel tanks, where we'll make it part of the capital plan. We'll see if we can get some money from the state, and then we won't expend all the money that we put in from the capital plan.
I'd much rather see us get funding from the state than coming out of the town coffers, but we need to anticipate both avenues.
Right. Yeah, and DOT's come through on a couple of projects in the area, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
It did take us a long time for the Pleasant Street Bridge to get that project funded through the small bridge program. It took hounding our legislators to, talk to Mass DOT officials, and it took a lot before that came through. But given the state of this project, I think it makes it a higher priority.
So can you start on town funds and then reimburse the town with the state funds?
That's not usually how state grants work. Usually you have to have a fully executed contract with the state, and it's not retroactive. So hopefully, if we're able to submit this fiscal year and we hear, in a relatively short order, then so we'll play whatever, however it rolls out. We'll try to maximize the state funds if we receive them.
Are our legislators read into this fully?
Yeah.
Okay. Chris, do you have more, or do you want to move on to Dave?
Okay.
Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to back up very briefly to permit and licensing fees. Heather, I have in the back of my mind that was an agenda item already for the select board sometime in the past. And if I remember correctly, they voted not to reduce or make any changes to the fees, at least at that time. Is that correct?
They did. So our renewals come up in December for all our annual licenses. And they did vote not to waive those fees at the time. What I had said at that time, I'll say again, like I've tried to work with the businesses that did approach us about requesting if a waiver was possible, to work with MRPC on different programs that have grant funds for businesses. And so I've worked with the economic development director at MRPC and put him in touch with those businesses.
Thank you.
Good. We still have hands up. I just want to make sure that you guys are set.
I'm good.
Okay, before moving on. Minutes. Hopefully you had a chance to review the minutes from October 8th, 15th, and 29th. They're in the OneDrive. And if you have, then I'll entertain any motion that anybody might have regarding the minutes.
I'm
I have not.
Well, if we can pass them without you, we might do that.
Okay.
We'll just, you know. Well, I know that October 8th, I think we had already brought up and we hadn't had a chance to look at it, and I'm sure that Heather would like to move it out of that file, so.
we need 4 votes. So
Yeah. So if people have read it, and if anybody who does want to, I'll certainly entertain a motion if there is one.
I would move to approve all 3 sets of minutes.
Second.
Okay, all in favor by roll call. Chris,
Aye.
Jay, you want to abstain?
Yes.
Okay, Dave,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes,
Evan,
I assume,
you shouldn't vote.
I'm choosing to abstain only because I wasn't there for any of them.
and that's fine.
So I'll abstain.
Okay. And I for myself. So the minutes of October 8th, 15th, and 29th are good to go, which will bring us closer to Thanksgiving, which is nice. Committee department reports.
Who wants to start?
Peter has his hand up, so go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, very briefly, the school committee has met a couple of times since we last met. Most recently on the, I believe the 8th, 6th, last Wednesday. The largest topic of discussion has been the move to what they call video streaming or live streaming, excuse me, which is exactly the topic that I went into some depth with the superintendent when she visited our meeting back in the October timeframe. And so what has happened since we met last was that the school department entered into another agreement with the LEA to do live streaming, which effectively means that during the 4 full days of instruction, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and there's a part day of instruction on Monday that's fully remote, but Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, where you have half the students in the classroom and half the students who are not in the classroom. As of the beginning of February, all students will be receiving simultaneous instruction from one teacher who's teaching live students in the classroom and remote students at home. And to some degree, that's already happening. It's happening in the high school. It's happening on a limited basis now in the middle school, grade 8 in particular. And that is now infiltrating to the entire school department. And there was a modification made to the calendar in the week prior to and following the Christmas vacation to do professional development training using the half-day model to get teachers ready to do that. And they should be fully operational on this essentially by the end of the month. And that CARES Act money that we referred to earlier that was spent largely on in-classroom equipment and teachers' computers and that kind of thing is instrumental in making that happen. And I should also mention that this is now a compliance issue because the Commissioner of Education has basically mandated a minimum hours of instructional training that exceeded what we were doing in our initial hybrid model. So this enhanced hybrid model will accommodate that.
Nice. Next.
I guess I'll do my spiel. I'll start each
Don't
day
you
of the
have
week.
all the committees? Wait a minute. You have all the committees.
Yeah. I have one committee report per night, Monday through Thursday. Monday through Wednesday, and then this meeting this evening. First of all, Parks met on Monday. We are over time working on policies that do not exist for the most part. We do have some field use policies, but there's very little actually documented policies that we feel we need to get in place and be proactive rather than reactive to things such as, and we spent some time talking about this, and that non-departmental beach use. There's been a couple of uses that were outside of department programming that have happened over the last couple of years, and we are intending to put a policy together for those uses. And then other policies having to do with uses of the other parks properties. We are working on a decision on hunting on parks property. That will probably happen probably by middle of February. We'll have a final decision one way or the other on how we're going to word that. Some more discussion about Marshall Park. We had a capital plan request in for $50,000 to allow us to get going with help with design and consulting. It is at either number 13 or 14. My list is so scribbled up the way we move the numbers around. It's right at that level anyway in the capital plan. And to this date, I don't know where the cutoff line is, but I believe it's above that point for this year. So we're not optimistic that that money is going to be available, but we are going to be looking for other sources to tap to at least keep this project moving forward, and hope for whatever funding is needed to get the final master plan put together. And then the intent is to go after grant money to actually do the project. Next meeting for parks will be a workshop with the skate park committee on January 25th. And then our next regular meeting will be on Friday, February 12th, which is a Friday. It was the only day of the week that worked for everybody, given other meetings and commitments to town boards and commissions. So that's it for parks. CPC met on Tuesday. A final prioritization of projects was completed. There was a couple of questions about Vertec projects that are included in that list as to whether the numbers have been updated, and Heather has been working on that for us. But
I'm sorry, just for point of clarification, CPC is Capital Planning Committee?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. Okay.
I've tried to shorten names of everything because it gets long and drawn out after a while. So we've got basically the Vertec projects that made it anywhere near the top or in the top 20 are envelope projects that will help stabilize the buildings for the short term. They're not by any means cheap projects, but such as Ritter has a number of the small pieces of the Vertec report lumped together in hopes of stabilizing that building with fascia work and stuff like that. And the adjustment upward dollar-wise on that one was a little more than we expected. So there's still some discussion back and forth on how that's going to be handled. We did have a brief discussion about the capital planning projects policy towards dollar amounts and so on, as we had started early on, that this committee was made aware of. We intend to have another meeting, and I forget the date, but previous to that next capital planning meeting, the intent was to communicate with this board to discuss whether or not capital planning should work on updating their part of the debt policy, or at least make a recommendation with an updated policy to hand over to Finance Committee when we do the complete policy review. And the committee's willing to do that, is my understanding. Or if this committee feels, they basically want to take on the whole thing, then they'll leave it at that. But it was decided, I think, that the capital planning would like to make a recommendation on the aspects that affect capital planning.
For debt? Again, just to clarify, for debt
No,
or the cap?
the cap and definitions of a capital project, those types of things, those are all under
Okay.
that same policy.
Okay. No, I thought you were referring to the debt policy. So.
Oh, yeah, no, and I may have interjected that accidentally.
Okay.
One public comment I made at that meeting that, or was it the previous meeting, Heather? I'm not sure. It was one or the other. Anyway, there was a project that was withdrawn by the DPW for good reason. It was another parking lot for the senior center. And it was like $125,000 plugged in to put a parking lot between the building and the playground. And I think basically the DPW director took a look at that, and Heather, and felt that it hadn't been fully vetted. So it was pulled from this year's plan to study it more and come out with a more comprehensive plan and dollar amount. My comment to that, as it was where it was being pulled out, was that in the new analysis, after walking the property, I was walking the Passios property and all those properties up to the center of town, looking at different things over one weekend. And it occurred to me that there's barely enough room to get a half dozen parking spaces if we don't open up more space for that potential parking lot. And my comment was that before we put a skate park in between the playground and the Passios school, we need to determine whether or not we need to move the playground towards the school and open up an appropriate amount of space to give the senior center the parking that it really needs. It's something that we've piecemealed for many, many years. And if we're going to put money into a new parking lot, let's do it right and do it once. So that's somewhat of a public comment on top of my committee report. Last of all, TC Passios Design Committee met last evening. The architects and engineers worked through a list of things that we did not make a firm commitment one way or the other on over the past few months as to flooring types, and there was some discussion about the possibility of a loading dock, which they're going to take a look at a different perspective, but we gave them some direction on that. That's not going to hold them up. There were a few other pieces, such as the parking lot that will be created on the front of the West Wing. And it was voted to, instead of having two sidewalks and the parking lot with the trees in between. At this point, the trees are going to be removed in front of the west wing, and we're going to move the parking lot closer to the buildings so that we don't duplicate sidewalks parallel to each other, that type of thing. And one important vote, and I think Chris alluded to it in his report on the Rubik's, is that we voted not to fund the equipment for the commercial kitchen. Some of the numbers that were thrown around for that equipment was $200,000 to $300,000. First of all, as you know, we're looking to keep the cost of this entire project down as best we can, and there are other sources available, including money that was set aside in a bond a number of years ago that may or may not ever come through, but there are other funding sources to purchase that equipment down the road. That's pretty much it. We expect, as I mentioned earlier, to have numbers start coming out in early to mid-February, and public outreach starting by early March. That's my report.
Anybody else? Oh, Peter,
Yeah, just a question for Dave.
Sure.
Is the expectation that that space will be left for a kitchen and just not messed with, or what's the thinking there?
Yeah, I left a piece of that discussion out, and I'm glad you brought that up, Peter. The infrastructure will be upgraded along with while the rest of the building is being done, because it just doesn't make sense to leave all the old infrastructure in there with the expectation that it will be a commercial kitchen in the future. And the cost to do it now will be a lot cheaper than trying to do it as a smaller project later.
Okay.
So yes, it will be still held aside as space intended for a commercial kitchen with the infrastructure upgrades, but the equipment will not be purchased as part of the project. Okay.
Heather, did you just raise your hand?
I did.
Okay.
I would just add on to what Dave said about capital planning, but just add that that parking lot project is going to be noted in my presentation. Just that it was that, like Dave said, that it's too preliminary to include it in the plan. So it wasn't a ranked project. There were a few that weren't ranked, but it will be noted in the presentation. Just
Okay, so
down on it.
are you going to be doing the capital plan presentation, or is the capital planning committee coming next week?
I will be doing the presentation.
Okay.
One other quick comment, if I could. The capital planning committee did also bump 2 or 3 projects either to the bottom of the list or off the list because we feel they should be absorbed through facilities funding in the budget. They were small ticket items, as we had voted earlier in our meetings that our target might be $30,000 for the benchmark for a capital project. And these projects were under that. It was interior painting of one of the facilities and a couple other projects that it was felt should be under care and maintenance of the buildings, not a capital project. Just wanted to add that.
Okay, Evan?
Just a quick question, Dave, you said that the skate park, has it actually been set to go between the playground and TCP? Is that actually finalized now?
Depends on who you ask.
I remember the last meeting you had mentioned, I think at least 2 other possible locations, and that it was still up in the air.
Well, honestly, I hope the Parks meeting on the 25th settles whether or not it goes to Marshall Park, which at this point, from my understanding, is the only place that the Parks Commission will support it. That doesn't mean that it won't still go on the Passios property, but it will not be supported by the parks.
Okay.
Chris? Oh, I'm sorry. Chris?
I'm sorry. Just for clarification on that question, my understanding was that, and this may be a vote that's so old it's irrelevant at this point, but my understanding was that the Board of Selectmen voted to basically pledge that property to the fundraising committee for the skate park 2 or 3 years ago now, and that the skate park has been, steadily raising funds with that specific site in mind, and has even done some preliminary planning with that site in mind. Is this ultimately the Board of Selectmen's decision, or who's the deciding authority for this?
I think I'll throw that one to Heather, because that's been bouncing back and forth from one committee to another over the past number of months.
Thanks, Dave.
A potato?
Yep.
So I don't want to rehash the whole history, but yeah, the skateboard park group did come to a select board meeting, presented different options. They voted at that same meeting based on certain factors. Part of that was visibility. And that was a security concern for the police department, that it be in a visible area. So they did make that vote to have, allow them to proceed with that plot of land in mind.
Yeah, I think at the time that vote was taken too, that and I could be wrong about this, but it was a much smaller footprint that they were talking about at that first meeting where they talked about.
And that is one of the issues that's bouncing back and forth. And one of the key things is that this thing moved forward until Parks put the brakes on it and said, wait a minute, we haven't agreed to anything, and we don't want this park to be built and then on non-Parks property and then try to turn it over to Parks. So that's kind of where we're stuck right at the moment. And that just, I have a copy of the letter from the Board of Selectmen. It was the second meeting actually that there was a vote on the location of the park. It was supported at a meeting previous to October 10th, 2018, that the concept was supported by that board. And then on April 10th, 2018, they voted to support it on the Passios property, west of the West Wing, if you want to call it that, or whatever, in that area, just next to Kids Kingdom or the playground.
So, and this is just one man's opinion, and it really isn't a finance committee matter, I don't think. But as somebody who's personally contributed to this project, I contributed with the expectation that it was going to be built where the Board of Selectmen had agreed. And I think that that's something that needs some consideration, that this is being done with private money that is being fundraised, with a plan that is being campaigned, that the Board of the select board and the town has essentially signed off on. And that's a concern. The other point that I want to make here, and it's nobody's fault, I'm not blaming anybody, but this is all part of the, over time, the mismanagement of that whole property that includes a playground, probably a parking lot that should be there, open space, and the TC Passios. And I'm very sympathetic to Select Person Adams, position that we should be, seriously considering that piece of land as continuity for, land that children are on and cross. And, we tried to do something at Marshall Park years ago. It was a half-hearted effort, but ultimately it was tucked so far away, it never had a chance. And I personally, I think that this needs a broader hearing that includes not just the Parks Commission and not just the people that are leading this and raising the money, most of whom are kids, but also townspeople as a whole.
Yeah, and I think basically the issue with Parks was whether or not they were going to accept responsibility for it, not that, so I think that's what made it the hot potato. So, but anyway, Chris, you've had your hand up for a very long time. So.
Yeah, my question, I guess back to capital planning, but is the demolition of the primary school a capital project or some other project that's also coming forward on this warrant article?
No.
No, it's not capital, and no, it's not coming forward this year?
both at this time.
Either.
I think basically, unless somebody creates a warrant article for it, that it would not be part of the capital. It's not part of the capital plan, I guess is the. And unless somebody all of a sudden comes up with however much money it's going to cost to take it down. I don't know if there's been a vote to take it down or. I think there was a straw poll that was taken at a town meeting about taking it down. So.
I just know it was the discussion topic at the select board on Tuesday.
Mhm.
That is the vision that the board has, is to proceed with a park at that location. So they're working on, that's one of their goals this year, is to work on a landscape design to present to town meeting in May. So it still would be too early to present a demolition article because there's also consideration that has to be paid to APDC regarding demolition by neglect.
Yeah, and honestly, I think the APDC bylaw needs to be updated, removed, or otherwise, because it's getting in the way of right decisions if there's no need to preserve a building that has no.
And that point was raised by Selectman Jeffries at Tuesday's meeting.
Yeah, no, I know. I just think it's something that
Yeah.
we gotta deal with quickly because we need to deal with some of these buildings.
And when we voted for the architectural preservation district, did we ever anticipate that we'd be creating a logjam for ourselves, the same voting body? And these are all, effectively 50+1 votes. We're going to allow town meeting to be hamstrung by a bylaw that we created. I mean, to me, it just seems a little silly.
An article was
Okay.
put up at town meeting asking for $400,000 for demolition, and it was voted down.
For many different reasons other than the
Not
real
APDC
reasons.
reasons.
Right.
Yeah.
It was before
it was still
APDC
voted
was
down.
even voted. Yeah, but
Yeah, the only other problem I see is in the capital planning, there's significant money that's going to preserve a building just to keep it in an envelope status. So at some point, in my mind, that building should just be demoed and we should move on with our lives.
there's virtually nothing going to its primary. The old primary in the capital. The projects that I mentioned were for Ritter and Town Hall.
Okay.
Demolition. Is it in year? Let's see.
24, maybe?
Yeah, 24.
Yep.
Wow.
All
That's
right.
according to the Vertex reports numbers.
Is there any other committee or department report that anybody has? Chris, is your hand still up because it's,
It was still up.
Communities.
all right. Just very quickly, I'm sorry, Jay, I'm sorry, were you trying to?
Well, Green Communities met. I don't know if Heather wanted to update that.
And Dave was there too.
Yes. Meeting hopping.
I didn't get the whole meeting, but
So essentially, we just spoke about the status of the current Green Communities competitive grant projects, when the next grant round funding would be that we could apply for the LED conversion portion. And so we would have to have all our projects completed, the current year's projects, and our annual report, which is an undertaking in itself, by February 12th, which everyone agreed to. That was too short a notice to purchase everything that needs to be done, get all the work that needs to be done at the public safety building, and get that report done. So everything would have to be processed, and so this year is the first year that they're splitting grant submissions into 2 rounds instead of just 1 round. So we be able to apply in October for that. So that gives us a little more time to get our current projects done, to look into a maintenance contractor. Once we do purchase the streetlights, there's going to be a period of time that we're going to be responsible for the maintenance. And also put together an RFP for that.
Evan?
So I'm curious as to what happens if we don't actually get awarded the grants, but we've already voted to purchase the streetlights. Where does that then put us?
We would have to pay for the cost of the conversion, or we just hold off until the next application round, I would guess.
Would that go through like another town vote again, or is that,
If it required an appropriation, then it would require a town meeting vote. If not, if we were just going to hold off on resubmitting, then it would not.
No, basically at this point, we would just own the streetlights and have to maintain them. And then if they were able to get a grant at a later time to do the conversion. And if we wanted to go ahead and just do the conversion, then yes, that would have to come back to town meeting.
so the funding is there to purchase the lights, but the funding is we need the grants in order to do the conversion?
That's correct.
Correct.
Town meeting
Has it-
appropriated the funds to purchase the streetlights, and there's going to be considerable savings just in purchasing on the maintenance that Unitil was charging us just to maintain the lights.
I remember all that. I was concerned that for some reason I had this memory that the grant was required for everything. That if we didn't get the grant, then we had to then pay for everything ourselves. I wasn't aware that we had, in that meeting, that we agreed to. I guess.
Heather, that savings number was what, 6,000 a month? Once we purchase? And that doesn't take into consideration having to pay for our own maintenance, but
Right.
we'd have 6,000 a month to work with.
Yeah, I think basically that just stays in the budget and then basically, I'm going to assume it stays in the budget just in case we need to spend it on lights and stuff.
And data, once it does happen, to actually know what the operational cost is.
Right.
Okay, any other department or committee reports? Seeing none. The last item that I had on here was around, and maybe tonight there's not enough time to really get deep into it, but I did want to talk in terms of fiscal policies having to do with the receipt of meeting materials or things that we're going to be asked to take action on or recommendations on. That whether or not, and I don't know if we can do this or not, and Heather, you can answer this, but basically, I'm thinking that if we don't receive something 48 hours in advance, that, I mean, obviously we'll have to, you know, like certainly there will be presentation, but it's really kind of, especially coming into the budget season, I would expect that if we can get the information 48 hours in advance, we can post the materials because there's no other way for people to be able to review the materials. And what I would like to do is amend our agenda so that the meeting materials can be attached, especially any kind of budget proposal or budget presentation so that people attending the meeting or watching the meeting can follow along. But also just so that we have a chance to kind of absorb it a little bit before we're asked to comment, question, or whatever. So, I don't know if it needs to be a policy around that or if anybody feels a particular way about that. I'm certainly open to hearing any comments, questions, or concerns. Peter, you just.
I think that I definitely have a concern about the public having access to the documents that we're using. And I've personally been very critical of the school committee in that regard. And they've pledged to fix it and haven't. quite frankly, quite bluntly. And it's a problem, and I think it's probably an open meeting violation or pretty darn close in a lot of circumstances. So I think that that's something that we as a town should be paying pretty close attention to. And one way to deal with that, in my opinion, is to create a public share and put documents in the and list the public share and a URL to that public share in the agenda. And then just put the documents that are going to be used for the meeting in that public share, not to be edited or anything, but kept there by the means that the author intended. And ultimately that would be great as well, because whoever's taking minutes then doesn't have to post those documents on their own and or link to someplace else that they don't know where to link to. So it would make life a lot easier to do it that way. With respect to the 48-hour window, at this point, I don't want to put an undue burden on anybody. And I want to be very careful about that.
So I would say lacking the 48-hour puts the undue burden on us. And I think that's unacceptable. I mean, I'm very analytical. I like to look at the material beforehand, formulate the questions. So I think the 48 hours is kind of necessary for efficiently running a meeting.
I agree to having emails come into your inbox at 3:00 in the afternoon on the same day of the meeting. For me, that's impossible for me to do any type of review at all before the meeting.
As far as, Heather, is that going to be any kind of an issue?
I'll just make that known to the departments that you're going to be meeting with.
Okay. Are you going to be, and I know that usually with when you do your forecast and your capital plan, and I know you're starting with doing that next Tuesday with the Board of Selectmen. Is that something that you already post on the Lunenburg town site or no?
No.
Okay. Because I would like to, I'm sorry?
It will be posted after I present to the board.
Okay, but that's what I mean. So it'll be there before our meeting. So,
Yep. And I can make sure you have it at least 48 hours before your meeting.
yeah, I figured. But yeah, and I think it's also because I know that people are used to coming into the meeting in town hall and picking up like any handouts that people bring in, and usually they do bring them in, but we can't even do that now. But yes, so if it would be helpful to have those, and actually when we get to the public hearing portion of the warrant articles, which hopefully there won't be too many warrant articles this year. That would be sweet.
No more than 30.
Yeah, that basically that'd be the same as well. That we're not going to be able to make any to me, I would be happy with looking at a fiscal policy that states that we're not going to be making any recommendations if we don't have the material in advance of the meeting. Just because I know that some people do feel uncomfortable, and again, I don't even think of questions until after, I've looked at it and finished being confused by it, and that sometimes doesn't even happen until somebody else asks a question that makes sense. But yeah, so if you let the departments know that as we come into budget season, the 48 hours is going to be a thing, and however we post it, I think that would be great if there was a public way to post it. If that doesn't exist, then I'll probably try, like I said, to, if it can be in a format that I can attach to the agenda so people can at least find it there, if there's not another place to find it. And you're right, I think townwide it would be a good idea, because I don't know how people are making meeting material, paper materials available to people attending the meetings. Does anybody else have anything on that they wanted to say before I move to, and before I move to public comment, I do want to just say I did schedule a Zoom room for the 28th. Are you folks wanting to meet on the 28th, knowing that we're meeting next week for the 5-year forecast and capital plan?
I think we should leave it on the calendar and
Yeah.
make that decision next week.
Okay. Then I'll do that. And then basically that'll give people a chance to, like chew on the 5-year forecast and capital plan as well before we have that meeting on the 28th.
I have one calendar question for Heather, if you don't mind. When does the warrant close, and when will the finance committee report for the warrant be required, finalized?
On the calendar I sent.
Okay.
March 15th it closes
Yeah,
Okay.
at 4:00.
at 4 o'clock. Yep.
Is that when the finance committee report is due?
It's, I think, a week after. I don't have it in front of me. Chris, do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have it in front of me. Finance Committee report forward to SB, the 30th, it says. Finance Committee report for warrant to Select Board Office. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
That's the report that goes into the annual town meeting booklet.
Yeah. Yeah.
But your public hearing prior to that, where you make your recommendations, that would get printed in the warrant as well. So it,
Yeah.
Right. No, but I was specifically asking about the report that we'll write that will be printed in the warrant.
So I like the way Peter says "we" because that means that he's probably going to take the lead on this. That's really awesome.
I thought that was part of my job.
It is, yes. You're going to be the. Yes. Just so anybody knows.
I'm just
down the
trying to
road-
plan here. I'm just trying to.
Yes.
And I apologize. I either didn't see or didn't read that email. So
Yeah, that's part of the vice chair's responsibility. Yes.
Can you see that?
no.
Little small.
Yeah. Little.
Finance. Oh yeah. Okay. Finance
There we
committee
go.
report. Yes, 3:30. That makes sense.
Okay.
And then yeah, because we will have voted on the 25th. All of our recommendations.
Okay.
All right, with that, is there any public comment from anybody on the committee? Is there any public comment from anybody in the public? No, we have a public. Let me,
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Dave, right?
I see,
I'm assuming, Dave, is
I see
that
a
you?
phone
And
number I
I can't
recognize.
unmute you, so you're gonna have to unmute yourself. Yeah, I guess, well, maybe Dave doesn't have a comment.
He's got to press
He must
star
some-
something, doesn't he? He's on a,
That's
he's
it.
on a,
R9.
unless Terry can unmute him.
I can't, I can ask him
Lost
to
him.
unmute.
There
No,
he
he
is.
just,
His
oh,
hand's
there he
up.
is. I see his hand. I don't know how to tell him to unmute.
You can't
The only-
you can't right click on that number, Terry?
I can ask to unmute, but I can't unmute.
All right. Try
It's
that.
either that or unmute everybody.
Everybody is unmuted.
Okay.
Oh, from your end?
Yeah, because I haven't turned anybody off. So is it a star? Do they have to push *9 in order to speak?
Yeah.
It looks like he's on a
Request
landline.
speak.
Dave, I'm trying to recognize you. I just don't know how to.
I lost him again off my list.
Yeah,
Still
no,
there.
he's there because he has his hand up, so he's at the top of the page.
Oh.
Dial 9 to request to speak.
*9.
Request though, but yeah.
Yeah.
which effectively raises his hand, I believe.
Let me call him and speak to him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
And now he'll know my number.
I bet
That's
you he already
okay.
does.
Well, he has to hang up and answer. He might not even do that. Dave, Chris is calling you. You can hang up.
We
Well,
all,
no, okay, yeah. Turns out he knows my entire family.
State police.
Yeah. I'm stuck in a finance committee meeting.
Hi, Dave Rogers here. Thank you. I was pressing star 9 and star 6 and pound 8 and pound 9, whatever. Thank you. I appreciate the follow through. I'll be brief. First of all, Dave Passios, with regard to Marshall Park, please ensure that monies are spent to survey that park, because a while back we cut a bunch of trees down that we thought were ours, and they weren't. They were a neighbor's. So we really should know what we're doing over there, and that only way to do that is with a survey.
David, that's
Okay,
just so you know, that's in first steps of our plan.
Good. Super, thank you. I want to talk a little bit about practical politics. And the first subject is revolving funds. And, this, from my perspective, is a way to guarantee monies for various budgets and allocations. So, and obviously the inference is that it doesn't go into the general fund, so you can't allocate it for anything else. So it's something it's grown exponentially almost, so it's something to keep an eye on. The other comment I'd like to make is about operating budget versus debt exclusion with regard to the Passio School. Now, simply stated, with the debt exclusion, we'll have to have an election and people will have to vote, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So it's my opinion that more people will vote than will come to town meeting. And with something that is going to be as expensive as this, in the millions, I think everybody should have an opportunity to cast their ballot either yes or no. So I would strongly recommend and hope that it would be a debt exclusion rather than an operating budget. And the second part of that is, I don't know how, with such a volatile forecast for a whole bunch of things, that we could possibly consider putting it in an operating budget, because I think it's going to be very expensive. With regard to the Passios renovation, I have long asked for, and it's fallen on deaf ears, to have some sort of analysis as to what the carry costs would be for the Ritter, the Town Hall, the Brooks House, and the Primary. And I think that's all part and parcel of this project. I personally would not like to vote for something and then find out that there's another, couple $100,000 for carry. So I would like to know exactly what the total cost would be. And to that point, again, to Dave Passios, and you guys are a lot smarter than I, but I've seen this so many times that when we do a project, we don't allocate monies for certain things. And furniture, fixtures, and equipment in that project, I think, will be a significant number, and moving expenses and all that kind of stuff. So I am hopeful that we will receive as close a hard number as we possibly can. Now, with regard to operating costs and expenses, I know that this is a moving target, but I think that the architects will be able to help us, because they can research and find out what the average operating expenses for this kind of a building would be locally and in their associations, so that they could present a per square foot allocation, rather than trying to figure out what the electric bill is and all of that kind of stuff. So I think it's a doable number. And I think, for the sake of conversation and rough figuring, I think it's a doable number to set up 3 columns and just basically put down if the building, turnkey comes in at X million, it's one number, and then a middle of the road, and then a high number, and we could certainly figure out what the carry costs for that would be. Heather, what do you think today a realistic number for debt would be for a project like this?
I'm not going to answer that.
What?
I don't
She said
think we're
she's
there
not
yet.
gonna answer that.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
I
that's-
mean, I'm not setting you up or anything. The marketplace says that you can borrow money today at what interest rate?
Oh,
That's all I'm asking.
Oh,
Not talking project costs.
Yeah, no, I'm talking debt cost. If you go out and borrow $20 million today, the market is so much percent. That's all I'm saying.
okay.
1 point something.
And
We've got
I would think that
very low
it's
rates.
something between 2 to 3%.
Yeah.
As a range. Okay, that's all I'm saying. So all you have to do is extrapolate that number and figure out what the carry would be for 30 years based upon that range of numbers and the range of costs. So we'd have a rough idea of what this thing is going to cost us, and I would look towards the architects to give us advice and counsel in that, and also our financial advisor could tell us what the going rates are. Okay, so I think that's a number that is certainly attainable.
Oh, yeah. Actually, that number we might be closer to be able to tell you that, yeah, it's two is probably 2 to 3 is definitely probably by the spring.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm just looking for a rough idea, for
Sure.
talking points, and I understand the financing process that you have to go through. I understand that markets change and stuff, but that would give us a rough idea. Just like if you're going to buy a house,
Yep.
and if you're paying $300,000 for a house and the current rates are 2%, you know what your monthly payment is going to be. That's all.
Yep.
So those are my points, and thank you for being so persistent to allow me the opportunity to discuss this, and thank you for all your hard work.
Okay, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Thanks. Bye-bye. Okay,
and any other public comment from the public? Okay, nobody's raising. I have no idea. Oh, was that your phone, Chris?
Yeah, yep.
Okay, thank you.
I'll have to build a town for that call, but
January 21st. Okay, so next Thursday, we're back here for the 5-year forecast and capital plan presentation. Is there anything else anybody wanted on the agenda next week? Or is that enough?
I think we'll have plenty to chew on next week.
Okay, and then the 28th, I'll hold the agenda setting until next week's meeting, but we will have a meeting on the 28th as well.
Oh,
And
I do have one question
go ahead.
for next week. Last year, Heather, when you did the forecast, you included the superintendent in that. Is that your intention again this year?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay. Then with that, I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn at 9:06 PM.
Second.
All in favor, Evan,
Aye, for sure.
Chris,
aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Jay,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
and I for myself. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.
And everybody.
Night.
Good night.